Welcome to Module 3 of English 240. Starting tonight, we are transitioning from Module 2, in which we concentrate on the genre of fiction, to Module 3, in which we will concentrate on the genre of creative nonfiction. Since this is the third of our 4 typical weeks together in creative writing, you should by now be familiar with the repeated patterns of assignments in them. So, in this video, I will first talk a bit about that transition from fiction to nonfiction, and second, point out only what is different about our assignments for this week. So first, the bit about our transition from fiction to nonfiction. You may recall that I pointed out the main similarities and differences of fiction and nonfiction in my earlier mini-lessons. Wait, what's a genre of creative writing? And the singular, plural forms of fiction. Our list of the similarities of fiction and nonfiction starts out with the fact that they are both forms of prose. The subsequent bullet points on that list of similarities are that both fiction and nonfiction are written in sentences, organized into paragraphs, and intended for an audience of readers. Add to those first 4 similarities that in creative writing, both fiction and nonfiction tend to take the form of narrative, which is the fancy professor term for story, instead of, say, descriptive or expository prose. The essential difference between them is that fiction is, fictional, and that nonfiction is factual. That is, what we write about in fictional stories is understood to be not true, and what we write about in non-fictional essays is understood to be true. The reason why I teach my module on nonfiction after my module on fiction in English 240 is that writers of what is most commonly called creative nonfiction tend to employ the techniques of the writers of fiction in order to give their work a more literary quality. As with the writers of fiction, then, the writers of creative nonfiction create scenes in which they first establish a setting, second, populate that setting with characters, third, have those characters take actions and exchange dialogue, and fourth, make their stories more interesting to their readers by combining the actions and dialogue in ways that create suspense. Essentially, their goal is to shape real-life events with these fictional and dramatic storytelling techniques to create factual, yet also literary stories. And yes, they balance out those scenes in which they show their stories to their audiences with summaries in which they tell their stories to their audiences. But especially when it comes to narrative nonfiction, my advice to all of you aspiring authors is to show more, tell less. That still stands. So, second, pointing out only what is different about our assignments for this week in English 240. As in the rest of our typical weeks in creative writing, you have a first set of assignments due on Mondays and a second set of assignments due on Thursdays. What is different is that this Monday is the first one on which you will have 4 types of assignments due instead of 3. The first 3 types of assignments are still your developing understandings, your reading responses, and your writing exercises. The 4th type of assignment that is due this Monday is your critiques for the classmates who are sharing their writer's workshop pieces with us. You will similarly have critiques due on the next 2 Mondays after this, July 14th and July 21st. For more information on those, please consult the framework for our critiques for our writer's workshop this semester at the bottom of Module 0. The assignments due next Thursday, July 10th, will only be different for those of you in Group 2, because that is the deadline for your writer's workshop pieces. The rest of you will only be submitting minor work 3, your short creative nonfiction. So, pretty typical. There is, however, one way in which this week is atypical. You'll recall from my first video for the summer, Welcome to English 240, that almost all of our weeks will start on Fridays and end on Thursdays. One of the reasons I always say almost all is because this week, Cerritos College is observing the Independence Day holiday on Friday. So I am instead making the materials for Module 3, starting with this video, available to you a little earlier on Thursday. As always, if you have questions about our creative writing class, please feel free to email me at cgreene@cerritos.edu or to send a message to my inbox on Canvas. Please remember, though, that my response times will likely be slower if you email me on a holiday or a weekend, and especially so on a holiday weekend. I hope you have a great time experimenting with creative nonfiction in Module 3.